What is up? Welcome to the Bootleg Football Podcast, episode number 4, where the only thing we love more than watching football is what we drink while watching football. I am your host, Brett Coleman, once again here with my wonderful co-host, EJ Snyder. A lot going on today. A little bit of a busy random Monday in the NFL calendar, but it's the beginning of the so-called tampering period, so lots of trades, lots of deals, I guess, not being signed, but being agreed to in principle. Tons of news today. But before we get all that, of course, first two things we want to talk about. Number one, EJ, how are you? And what are you drinking?
I'm hanging in. Obviously, the world is a different place than the last time we podcasted. We're dealing with Corona and all the effects of that. So we've been physically separating. Everybody says social distancing, trying not to social distance, trying to physically distance and I saw social solidarity today. I thought that was good. Lots of people kind of coming together and doing what they can. So I'm all right. I'm hanging out and we get to talk about a lot of football. Today was a welcome distraction. We'll talk about that. But what am I drinking? I went for the hard stuff because just kind of feels like that kind of a day.
Yeah, it's been that kind of week.
We were stocking up, not hoarding, just stocking up, buying some essential stuff. And my wife decided on her own, so shout out to my wife, to buy a bottle of Glenlivet 12
Ooh.
And just bring it home and say, hey, here you go, in case things get rough. This might take the edge off. So I've got a glass of that. I have not had Glenlivet 12 in a while. And I have to say, it took a couple sips as we were doing prep, and it's better than I remember.
Yeah, I mean, you can't really go wrong with the Glenlivets or any of the Glens, really. Glenfiddich, Glenlivet. There's, I mean, I'm a Scotch guy, but and normally like Islays are my favorite, but I think Glenlivet is like a nice little change of pace for me when I don't want to be just blasted by smoke. With my normal, Lagavulins or Lafroigs, but I do love Glenlivet myself. I don't have a bourbon. I have an American whiskey, which some people might not understand the difference between those. Legally, a bourbon can only be called a bourbon if it is aged in brand new charred oak barrels. If you reuse those barrels, which Michter's has done for this American whiskey, it has to be called American whiskey. Cannot legally be called bourbon, but it's still essentially bourbon. It's the same mash bill. They just reuse barrels, and so it has a little bit of a different character to it. It's a little bit more mellow, and this is my first time I've ever had it, and I really, really love it. This is my first American whiskey I've had, period, and I definitely want to get more because these are absolutely delicious. It's just like the Michter's bourbon, but just kind of mellowed out a little bit, more sweeter. Just a super easy drinker. But with that, let's kind of get into all the madness that happened today, because there was a lot of it. What's your kind of early overall reaction to day one of free agency this year?
That's probably my lead from day one of free agency, is that you couldn't turn away. And the NFL is king. If anybody wondered about that or had questions about that, look, this is the trading period in the off season. And even if the other sports were going right now, the free agency buzz would have absolutely annihilated them. I was working today, taking care of my kids at home, dealing with some craziness that's going on at work, as a lot of people are right now. And I couldn't leave for 20 minutes and not come back and have not one headline, but 3 headlines about things that were, rumored to be happening or had already happened, or you just can't miss stuff. And it just completely reaffirms that the NFL is the top dog in the United States. It was a welcome distraction today from much more serious events. And, my Twitter timeline's a little bit biased because I've got it all geared to NFL and the draft. It was just flooded with football stuff today, and that was a nice change of pace.
Yeah, I kind of think you hit the nail on the head. It was a much needed distraction for the country with everything that's gone on, especially over the last, 72 hours is when things kind of really started to get even more serious. And just kind of having a day where we could all have real sports news to digest and kind of remind us why we all love sports so much and why it's such a kind of a unifying force in this country. It was really awesome. And again, it was a reminder that the NFL is far and away the biggest and best professional sports league in America. And it was just kind of nice to kind of have that back, if only for a little 24-hour period. So it was awesome. But in terms of the actual individual deals, let's start with just some of the trades beyond the. Because I'm a Texans fan. You guys know I'm a Texans fan.
Let's move right to the open wounds.
Let's rip the Band-Aid off, because
we decided for the top of the podcast that we would take the things that were most emotionally scarring for the day for Brett and I, and just lead with those. You longtime listeners know that you're a Texans fan. Some of the newer listeners are realizing pretty quickly that I'm a Bears guy. Have been for quite some time, and both the Texans and Bears did something today. Both of them, the Texans led right off early, and I texted you immediately, and it was almost a welfare text. It was a Brett, are you okay? Are you near anything sharp? Please don't. I like working.
Spoiler alert, I was not okay. I was not okay at all.
Yeah, and the narrator said he was not okay. Yeah, no, I checked on Brett immediately when I heard the news. And the news, of course, was...
I mean... DeAndre Hopkins and a 4th-round pick, and you only get David Johnson and a second. Which David Johnson, and we're not talking about like 2016 or 2017 David Johnson. We're talking about David Johnson now, who hasn't been healthy in 2 years, got outplayed by Kenyon Drake, and a 2nd-round pick that may or may not be a good wide receiver prospect if maybe the first 4 or 5 go off the board before then. And you're giving up a Hall of Fame player, because I think we can all agree that DeAndre Hopkins is on a first ballot Hall of Fame trajectory. In his prime, he's only 27 years old, and you take on the entire remaining contract of the corpse of David Johnson and get a 2nd-round pick, and you pay a 4th-round pick for the honor of getting fleeced. This is the worst trade I have seen in a very, very long time.
It's almost like it's really good to have a professional general manager running your team. I mean, just looking from the outside in on this one, Bill O'Brien so far is not, he's a great force for the rest of the NFL, getting good players and tons of draft picks. Last year it was draft picks. This year it's players. And, you know, I'm sad for Texans fans like you, because you're not going to get any argument out of me. I have been banging the drum for Hopkins as one of the more underappreciated assets in the entire league. So you're not going to get any argument out of me there. And for him, you know, I'm sure it's heartbreaking. He's put everything he's had in the Texans franchise, by all accounts, a tremendous leader in their locker room, a huge part. The Texans players were devastated today on social media, shell-shocked, whatever you want to say. But I think in the coming days, as that fades a little bit, DeAndre Hopkins is going to get really excited about the fact that he gets to go to work with Cliff Kingsbury, Kyler Murray, Larry Fitzgerald. Like, that's going to be a very intriguing offense. Kenyon Drake, I think, is dynamic in that system. He's going to have some fun there, and he doesn't have to be the guy, as he so often was, or almost always was, for the Texans. I think he's going to start to get excited after the pain fades, but there's definitely going to be some pain with this move.
I'll say this. As a Texans fan, it is terrible for the Texans, but it's good for DeAndre Hopkins, and it's good for the Cardinals. It's great for the Cardinals. So there's 2 out of 3 winners here, but unfortunately the big loser is Houston. But it's a great move for the career of DeAndre Hopkins. I think he's going to a better run franchise that, truth be told, is probably more... I think their arrow is pointing up more sharply than Houston's was. I think it's a better run team.
Isn't that a crazy thought, right? It just doesn't seem that long ago that the Cards were the place that old players went to die in the desert, right?
I mean, they've got it together. I mean, even you
And
saw last year, even in the games they lost, like they never
yeah,
got blown out. They were a competitive team.
I won a bet. We did a preseason betting special with the guy that covers betting for Windy City Gridiron, Sam Householder, and Sam came on with JB and I on Bears Over Beers, and we had to pick what was it? I think 3 division winners, 3 overs, 3 unders, and then a Super Bowl champ. So we had to make 10 picks apiece. And I actually picked the Cardinals to be an over and won the bet because they were competitive, right? They were going to put up points and they were going to squeak a few out. And this year it's not going to be squeak a few out. It's going to be blow a few out.
Yeah, they don't call him Cover Kyler for no reason.
Yeah. Yeah. He had a bunch of weapons. You think about Larry Fitzgerald, Christian Kirk, like Hakeem Butler's going to be coming back healthy. Now they've got Nuke and Kenyon Drake in there as a dynamic sort of two-way back. Kyler in his second year in the system, Cliff in his sort of second year calling plays and understanding what works and what doesn't. That's going to be a very dangerous offense. That is not an easy out.
When you look at their RPO game, with Drake and his ability to
their run
slash
game
and dash, Kyler's ability to sneak out the back door. Hopkins is a dominant slant runner, especially against press. Like if he's the number one option on those RPOs with like the backside slants. And of course Larry, Butler's got size on the outside. Isabella I don't think is a good receiver, but 4-2 is 4-2.
Take the top off.
Take the top. Just occupy the safety. That's all they need. Like that offense, just provided they use the 8th overall pick on a tackle, which I think they they had to before, but they really have to now because they already fixed receiver. If they get a tackle, like God forbid for the rest of the NFC West, God forbid Jedrick Wills was there, and you got Jedrick Wills at tackle that can actually protect, and now you don't have to keep in 6 or 7. You can go 5 wide all the time. You can actually operate an empty without getting Murray killed. That offense is going to be vicious. Absolutely.
Yeah, Wills
vicious.
Is really interesting. It's I guess fortuitous that you bring up Wills because he's used to protecting Tua, right? And Kyler and Tua have some similarities. They're not the same guy, but in terms of their movement in the pocket, their size, what they look for, the RPO game, they have some similarities. Wills is going to have some familiarity with working with a quarterback like that. It's not like he's going to some place that, he might end up going to some place that has a statuesque passer that doesn't move very much, but he's not had that for his last couple of years at Alabama. He's had Tua behind him, and Kyler and Tua are they're closer than you might think. And that's the other thing about that offense is even if you do get all those options covered, then Murray's going to be free, and he will gladly take the free 8 to 15 yards you're going to give him as a runner.
Without taking a big hit, too.
Nope. There's not going to be anybody there to greet him, so he's going to be able to slide. And boy, if you really break coverage, he's got enough speed to just run the crack and go right up the middle for 30. So, yeah, there's just not – I feel for defensive coordinators who are going to play Arizona this year. Their scheme is good. Their run scheme is fascinating. It's really cool to watch. I wish Matt Nagy would watch some Cliff Kingsbury run fit tape. But, yeah, that's just going to be a loaded offense. So for as much as you're paying, as you feel as a Texans fan, I'm sure Arizona fans are excited, or they should be. And like you said, 2 winners, and they just happen to be on the Arizona side, not on the Houston side.
Speaking of a fan base feeling good, how good do Vikings fans feel for getting a 1st, a 5th, a 6th, and a 2021 4th for Stephon Diggs, who wasn't even happy there in the first place?
Yeah, this is late breaking news. You hadn't heard about this before you came on, and I said, you stepped away for dinner and you missed one, just like we talked about at the top of the podcast. Yeah, Stephon Diggs, if you haven't heard, heads to the Bills. The Bills obviously were looking for a number 1 wide receiver. Most mock drafts at this point had them penciling one in out of this very loaded class. Instead, they make what I'll call a blockbuster trade. The interesting thing about this is Diggs, tremendous receiver, great route runner. They pay I don't want to say a fortune, but they pay a first, a fifth, and a sixth this year, and a fourth next year. Um, that's it's not a ton. It's not two number ones. It's not a one and a two. But the sneaky part of this deal is Diggs's monetary compensation is what, Brett?
It's what, like 11 million a year, maybe?
Yep. Yep. Amari Cooper just re-signed right before we started recording or it looks like he's going to resign for about 20 million per as a number one in Dallas. And here comes Stephon Diggs at like 11 or 12 million. And
which I have to assume they're going to try to renegotiate in a couple years, but still, if you're getting him for at least 2 years on 11 million a year,
yeah,
I mean, whew, that's a hell of a deal.
That's the sneaky part of this deal is they gave up draft capital for sure, but they get one of the best route runners in the NFL. My only question about this deal is Diggs' unhappiness stemmed from playing with Kirk Cousins. Largely, that was the reason that he gave. If he was unhappy with Kirk Cousins, he's going to have a bit of a rude awakening with Josh Allen. Josh Allen is a much improved quarterback who's getting better, but he is not accurate, and he will throw deep, which is amazing for a fast receiver like Diggs, but sometimes he's going to throw way too deep, and he's going to throw it 5 yards over Diggs' head, and we'll see how that plays in Game 6, Game 8, Game 10, when Diggs gets wildly overthrown by Josh Allen. So be interesting to follow that. But in terms of what Buffalo did to fill a need, in terms of what they paid out and the value they get monetarily against the cap, it's a pretty good deal for Buffalo.
My thing, how I interpret Diggs's frustration wasn't necessarily frustration with Kirk. I think it was frustration that he wasn't the clear number one. I think he had a
wait. A wide receiver is frustrated that they're not the first option on offense?
Yeah, I know, right? It's super cliche. But I never got the sense that he was totally okay with potentially being a 1A, 1B situation with Thielen. Yep. I think he wanted to be a 1NB or 1A and 2 situation, which, John Brown is, let's be realistic, he's not a number one, he's a number two. He's damn good number two, but nobody in their right mind should consider him a quality number one, which is what he was running as Buffalo's number one last year, and they were okay, but not good. I think I'm a little bit higher on Josh Allen than you are, maybe. Obviously, he's got inconsistency with accuracy, particularly with kind of winging things high. But I think as a decision maker, he's vastly improved. I think his pocket presence has improved. I think when they just kind of leave him in the one-step game and just get it out quick, and they really use the RPO game and they get Singletary rolling with 20 carries, like that offense is good. I think using Diggs really more as like a deep threat off play action with, those double moves that he's become famous for, where he just absolutely toasts people if you leave him on an island. I think that is really where he's going to be a difference maker. Is John Brown's fast enough that he's going to be occupying a safety, which means potentially you're getting Diggs one-on-one, and if Allen can just hang in the pocket long enough and just, he doesn't even have to be accurate, he just has to throw it far enough that Diggs can run under it. This can be a very, very good vertical passing game, specifically off of play action. I don't think this is going to be like a vertical passing game where you're lining up, in a 3-by-1 and with a 6-man protection, and you have all these progressions. You're moving across the field. Like, it's not like a Kansas City kind of vertical passing game. It's really like an old school like West Coast deep shot where we're literally working the bootlegs, we're working ISO runs, and then you hit with the deep bomb up play. Like, that's what the offense is going to be. But I think Diggs fits that.
Yeah, I think it's more Air Coryell, kind of, like you said, a West Coast deep shot passing game. And just to be clear, Josh Allen has outperformed my expectations. I'm not low on Josh Allen. He took that team and I would say exceeded expectations. He developed absolutely in all the ways that you said he did. He's developed farther, faster than I thought he would. I was not super high on Josh Allen coming out. Obviously, all the physical tools are amazing, but there was just so much to try and harness and unify there. I thought it was going to take some time. I think the Buffalo staff's done an amazing job, and Josh himself has done an amazing job, again, coming along and coming together more rapidly than I thought he would or could. So I'm not low on Allen, but he's also, I still think he's got room to improve, and he's already pretty good. He was challenging for the division last year. You give him some more tools, and yeah, look out. It's going to be a very interesting offense. So I'm not low on Allen, but I'm interested to see how Diggs' perception of Allen lands, just to be clear.
My one thing is I think you and I are in agreement that Diggs is a good receiver, but he's not quite the receiver that we think Allen needs, because, again, when he misses high. And we were both thinking, okay, like
big,
big, T. Higgins, Denzel Mims, like somebody with a catch radius. Because while Diggs has good hands, his catch radius isn't super large, and I think you need somebody that can kind of give Allen a little bit more of a margin for error. In the mold of, say, I don't know, DeAndre Hopkins.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm not going to say it because Brett's going to stab me through the heart with a fork. But
that, if you're going to give up
you're talking about
haul,
is Hopkins.
Yeah. If you're giving up that many picks, like that's who. If you're giving up 4 picks and one of them being a first rounder, it should be for DeAndre Hopkins, because he's the kind of receiver that Allen needs. Again, not that Allen's a bad quarterback, but you need catch radius to kind of help him along.
And honestly, if you flip these two, if it was Freaky Friday instead of Freaky Monday and Diggs went to the Cardinals.
Oh, Diggs fits the Cardinals like a glove.
Right, but if Diggs goes to the Cardinals with a 4th and, Minnesota gets Johnson and the 2nd or whatever, and you just swap the compensation and Hopkins ends up going to the Bills, the Bills are in a better spot, I think, again, because of the fit of the wide receiver with their quarterback strengths. And the compensation actually looks, I would say, kind of reasonable for Hopkins. Like, I would think that was fine.
It would be more fair. Fair.
And I think a better fit actually for both teams, right? Not that Hopkins is going to be bad. Hopkins isn't going to be bad anywhere he goes. He's just not going to be bad. He's an excellent, excellent receiver. And neither is Diggs. But in terms of fine-tuning the fit, I think you put, the hammer right on the nail that Hopkins would be a better fit in Buffalo and Diggs a better fit in the desert. So just kind of interesting that they both move on the same day for different compensation that seems a little bit lopsided in the favor of one team versus the other. But wouldn't it be interesting if that was swapped? So just one of those weird things that happens.
What did you, and I know this is going to hurt to talk about because you're a Bears fan.
Yeah, see, this is turnabout being fair play. You get to take the knife and stab it right back into me. So
what were the first words out of your mouth when you saw Jimmy Graham got $16 million?
There's 2 things there. One, that he got $16 million. That would have just that would have been straight laughter. And then you tell me who paid him, and it's straight tears. I did put an explicit rating when I set up the podcast on Google Podcasts, so I could say the word I said. I'm going to choose not to. But what I texted my colleagues at Windy City Gridiron was not appropriate for, say, my kids. I completely displeased. It was so far Graham to the Bears as an option. Obviously, the Bears need something at tight end. They need to draft one. They need to trade for one. There was big talk about Hooper. Look, Austin Hooper, the price went up, but I have no fault to Ryan Pace for saying, hey, that's too rich for my blood. I don't want to do it. But to pay basically $1 million less and get, you talked about the corpse of David Johnson. Let's talk about the zombified corpse of Jimmy Graham. He is not the player he was. I watched him in Seattle when he was here. He was already falling off and sort of not contributing in the same way. He goes to Green Bay. Again, you can argue about usage in Green Bay, but he was a shell of his former self. He is not a dynamic red zone threat playmaking tight end anymore, nor has he been for quite some time. The idea that you take a 33-year-old guy at that position who is clearly falling off and pay him $1 million or $2 million less than the top tight end in the market, it's just not anything we even considered. Like I've talked on a lot of podcasts and been asked, oh, what are the Bears going to do at tight end? I have never once brought up Jimmy Graham as a even, oh, and maybe it happens kind of option. Not once, just never even crossed my mind. So when I saw the news today, double take, made sure it wasn't a fake account, looked again, swore loudly, texted a bunch of people I knew, just felt completely gut shot. It's so surprising because the Bears don't have a ton of money in the first place. Yes, they need a tight end, but I think they would have been better served to leverage some of the younger tight ends on their roster and draft one even in the later rounds. I think there's some sort of sneaky depth at tight end this year in the draft. To shell out a ton of money to a guy whose production clearly is in the past.
Well, let me ask you this
completely
question.
Deflating. Yeah.
Let me ask you this question. Since clearly they brought him in because they thought he could deliver in the red zone, what would you rather have? Jimmy Graham at $8 million a year, or Colby Parkinson, who's 6'7" and runs in 4.5s?
Don't you start with me,
for
Brett
like $400,000.
You know the answer to that. We watched film on Brett and I watched film on Colby Parkinson, the Stanford tight end who's in this draft, together, and he's wildly underrated. He's very tall. He's 6'7". He runs very well. His releases are pretty good. His routes are not great, but his releases are very good. He's a tremendous red zone target. He's going to be available in the 4th, possibly the 5th, maybe even the 6th. One of the reasons he didn't have a ton of production this year is because his quarterback at Stanford was atrocious.
It was rough. It was really
just
rough.
Anything over about 10, 11 yards, he misses badly, like broadside of a barn badly. So Parkinson ran a lot of good routes and was wide open he left so many yards on the field. I would love to have a guy like Colby Parkinson. And there are other guys in the draft as well. Honestly, here's one for you, because here's another guy we watched and then who surprised at the combine. Albert O. Right? Out of Missouri,
if
right?
we're
He's
talking
not a
about
complete tight end.
No, but if we're talking about one-dimensional guys with athletic upside that cost a fraction of this,
Absolutely. And Alberto is probably, when everybody really digs down and looks into his film, which scouts have done, they're going to say, hey, this is a 3rd-round player. This is a 4th-round player. Like, he ran really fast, but he's not a developed tight end, but he's a damn good red zone threat because he's 6'6" and can jump. Right? He's a big guy. He's 255. Like, would you rather have Alberto, or would you rather have, again, the corpse of Jimmy Graham for $8 million a year? It's just, to me, it's a really confidence-shaking move in the Bears' decision-making leadership, because it just doesn't look like there's any potential upside, and they shelled out a lot of cash to do it, and I'm just left shaking my head.
It screams panic to me. It really does.
Desperation.
It's 100% desperation. And to me, spending $8 million on Jimmy Graham, I know in the grand scheme of things, the cap's going up. It might not look that bad in a couple years, but that's also $8 million a year less that you don't have available to give to, I don't know, insert free agent quarterback here, whether it's Teddy or Dalton or trading for whatever. It's $8 million less that you have to put on the table to potentially get a quarterback that is an upgrade for Mitch Trubisky, which is really their biggest problem. And if they miss out on one of those quarterbacks because they spent that extra money on Jimmy, that they could have just drafted somebody to accomplish the exact same role, probably better. It screams panic to me. And when you panic, you make really bad decisions with your cap.
Yeah. You want another one that nobody's talking about that I would like much, much, much rather have for every reason?
Like rookie tight ends?
Nope. In the league. Free agent.
Who?
Logan Thomas.
He's a free agent? Oh.
Yep. 6'6", 248. If he'd come out as a tight end instead of a quarterback the year he came out, which is what I advocated for, and everybody said, no, he's a quarterback. I said, no, he isn't. And the other thing is he was recruited to Virginia Tech to play tight end, so it's not like he had no experience. He was a tight end coming out of high school. He ran 4.61. That would have been second this year. His vert was 35.5. That would have been tied for fourth this year. Plus he's 6'6" and has that wingspan. His 3-cone was 7.05. That would have been third this year. And his 20-yard shuttle was 4.18. That would have been first this year. And Logan Thomas is going to sign for
pennies.
Yeah, nothing, right? He's going to sign for like $3 million a year, 3.5.
Like
maybe?
As long as we're just taking flyers, And remember, Logan Thomas, I think he had like 11-inch hands too. Like his hands were
huge,
gigantic.
He's massive, and he runs like a deer, man. 4.61 for a guy that's 250 and 6'6". That's fast.
And he hasn't. Let's be clear, he hasn't done anything in his 4 years in the league or whatever it is. But Jimmy hasn't really done much lately either, and you're giving him $8 million.
Mm-hmm. And I would much rather give a guy $3.5 million for, again, 2 years. Take a flyer, see if you catch lightning in a bottle, right? If you don't, you still have the extra $6 to $8 million to mess with, right? It's crazy. So, and then if you just wanted a good all-arounder, just again to plug a guy in to say, look, we have somebody serviceable that can play the position. Clive Walford's available this year.
Yeah.
And Clive Walford, his first 2 years in LA, Oakland, now Las Vegas. Sorry, too many team geographic changes. His first 2 years as a Raider, they threw at him a lot. They threw him like 55 balls. He caught like 39 of them, had something like 500 yards and a bunch of touchdowns. His production dropped off, but guess what? He went to Miami. Miami's been a wreck lately. Like, grab Clive Walford for whatever you can get him for. $3 million. I don't care. 4. It's half of what you're giving Graham, right? So there's options out there, and I can't find any good reason to say, oh yeah, Jimmy Graham's gonna do this for the Bears.
I don't know. I don't get it. I probably never will get it.
Nope.
I think one of the only teams that spent a lot of money today and maybe spent more on contracts than we expected them to, but at least did it in a smart way, would be the Dolphins.
Yeah.
You and I were kind of talking like, okay, if you're going to overpay people, at least overpay these guys,
with Byron Jones, right?
Byron Jones getting 16.5. Like, again, he costs twice as much as Jimmy Graham, but at least you're getting a player that's more than twice as good. So like if you're going to overpay, absolutely. Byron Jones is a guy I'd love to overpay. Kyle Van Noy getting 12,750. I'm totally fine with that. He already knows the system. He's a do-it-all linebacker, which we know Flores prioritizes versatility. So again, if you're overpaying him that it's not even really an overpay to me. Like that's fine. I qualify that under, quote unquote, getting your guy. Shaq Lawson at 10 isn't awful. When you compare him to the guys that are getting 20, like if you look at Shaq Lawson is half as good as top tier edge rushers and he's getting half the money, that's kind of in line with what you would expect. So again, 10 million might be jarring compared to what people were getting a couple years ago, but these days 10's not bad.
No, not for a guy that, first round pedigree. Now, I'm not a Shaq Lawson fan, but as long as the shoulder holds together, and again, this to me, the Lawson move in particular screams, we believe in our defensive line coaches, right?
Yes.
We believe that we can get more out of this guy than Buffalo got out of him, as long as he stays healthy. And again, 10 million sounds like a ton of money. It's not in the current cap. And if Shaq Lawson comes in and gets 6-7 sacks situationally, totally worth it.
That's worth 10 million.
I know that.
Yeah.
I know it seems like a crazy value proposition, but if he gets that, I don't think that he will. Again, I'm not a huge believer in Shaq Lawson, but it's not a wild overpay. Like if you ask me which deal was, worse or more bent, the deal for Lawson in Miami or the deal for Graham in Chicago. Look, it's Graham in Chicago just based on evidence, right? At least Lawson's younger, has some upside and might contribute. Like if Jimmy Graham contributes, I'm going to be quite frankly shocked.
So if he gets 7 sacks as a rotational player, that's what, like $1.5 million a sack? Well, guess what? If you're paying a guy $20 million a year and he gets 13 or 14 sacks, that's about $1.5 million a sack. So people would be totally fine with Khalil Mack getting 13 or 14 sacks at $20 million a year. That would be considered a good year, and it's the same dollar amount per sack. So again, I think as long as when you pay an edge rusher, if whatever you pay them, as long as they're coming out to about $1.5 million a sack, it's worth it.
Yeah, that's a crazy thing to say, but it's absolutely true in today's NFL. And I just think the average fan, really, one, overvalues sacks, and two, thinks that 10 is the floor, right? If they don't get 10, they're worthless. And I'm like, do you know how many guys actually got 10 plus? So, everybody's like 10, 10, 10. And I'm like, it's like when rookies come out and they're like, oh, he's a 10-year starter. And I'm like, do you know how many 10-year starters there are in the league? Like actual straight up 10-year starters? It's incredibly rare.
Especially in the trenches.
Yeah, I'm like, I would say 5-year starter would be great. First contract starter, 8-year starter would be excellent. 10-year starter is like, you're starting to talk about, hey, is this a Hall of Fame guy? Because it just doesn't happen in today's NFL. And neither do sacks with the quick passing game, with RPO, with the spread offenses, balls coming out more quickly. You don't get those 5-7 step drops where you're going to go back and get 25 sacks. I mean, Shaq Barrett getting 19 sacks in that environment is amazing.
I mean, he did get to play against some pretty bad tackles, but hey, still 19 is 19.
19 in today's NFL is amazing because so many guys don't even get 10, right? You're looking at all these guys and, hey, they got 7, they got 8, they got 6, they got 9. Okay, fine. Single digits is still pretty productive because it's not really about sack again. The average fan overvalues sacks, and you really have to look at pressures, right? Hurries, hits, tip balls, any kind of disruption to the offensive flow, whether or not they got the quarterback on the ground. And that's the other thing with the rules the way they are. Tackles are, defensive ends and edges are pulling up, right? They're doing two-hand touch and pushing those guys. So the old, go 2 more steps and play through, you can't do that anymore. That's a penalty. It's 15 yards on your team automatically. So in the environment we're in, if you pull 7 to 9 sacks, you're a valued pass rusher if you contribute a bunch of hits, hurries, rushes, and tip balls.
Yeah, I just look at it as, do you make the quarterback uncomfortable or not?
Yep.
And it's it's the Khalil Mack argument where there's some years where Khalil Mack is going to end up with low to mid single digits in sacks, but he still makes quarterbacks really uncomfortable on third down. So he earns his money. Now, not saying Shaq Lawson's going to be that guy, but again, for $10 million, I'll take that all day.
It's a worthy gamble. Really, I think the biggest thing is, does his shoulder stay together? Like, he had problems with the shoulder at Clemson. He wore a harness. I always had questions about that. I was like, that does not make a first rounder for me. A guy that uses his shoulder a lot, who has shoulder problems, had a problem with the shoulder in Buffalo. Like, if the shoulder stays together, he stays healthy. And I hope he does. Like, I really hope he does. I don't root for anybody to fail. And if Flores' coaches get together with him and say, hey, this is what we need you to do and how you need to do it, and he takes to it, and he ends up with that kind of relation, it's a steal, right? It's an absolute steal. So it's a low risk. I know 10 million sounds like not low risk, but it's a low risk, high reward gamble in today's NFL.
Yeah, and I would say the same thing with Kyle Van Noy. Again, it's ignore the sack numbers and pay attention to the pressures, pay attention to the coverage, pay attention to the leadership, pay attention to his ability to get people lined up, to recognize what he's seeing and make calls. He was an instrumental part of that Patriots defense. I know that Brian Flores loved him, again, because of everything that he did, not just on the field, but off the field to get that defense ready every single week. 12,750, bargain. Absolute bargain to me. It sounds like an overpay, but it's really not. Byron Jones, that corner duo is the most expensive corner duo in the league, but again, Flores...
It's also damn good.
It's also damn good, and Flores comes from New England, where they prioritize secondary over everything. We've heard the analysts over at Pro Football Focus talk about having coverage being more valuable than pressure because coverage can quote unquote create pressure by forcing the quarterback to hold the ball beyond that golden 2.5 second window. New England subscribes to that theory clearly, and it's worked clearly. Because at the end of the day, even if you don't have one great pass rusher, if you can make the quarterback hold the ball, even average guys can get home eventually, or at the very least, force a holding call. So that's kind of the philosophy they're going with, is versatility in the front 7, really good lockdown man-to-man corners in the back 4. I'm really intrigued to see how it works next year because we've seen that formula work with other teams, and I think it could very well work here.
Yeah, they're setting it up for that for sure, and they didn't hold the horses today. I mean, they spent money fast and furious. They signed four guys for, oh man, let's see, Van Noyes 12,750, Lawson 10 million per, Eric Flowers 10 million per, Byron Jones 16.5 million per. That's, they threw cash at it today. They needed to. They had one of the highest caps in the league. They have also one of the most open rosters, if you want to call it that.
Depleted's a good word.
Yeah, more needs than many teams. So, but it's kind of what you expect when those two things come together, right? You have a bunch of needs, you have a bunch of money. You're gonna see players that they like fly off the board on the first couple days, and again, guys that teams that win free agency don't typically win the year, but are the Dolphins going to be a much improved team this year? I think after the draft, we're going to see that they probably are, because again, they're holding extra picks. They're going to get a quarterback. I fully believe that this signals they're not tanking for Trevor, right? They are going to get their quarterback this year. They're going to move up to do it if they have to. They have the draft capital. They invested too much to say to their players, "Oh, we're just going to coast on Fitzpatrick again this year." They're going for a rookie, whether that's Tua or whether they've got somebody like Herbert in mind, whatever. They're going to go get their guy, and I think that's the move you can expect after today.
I think, again, that key question is Herbert or Tua, and we're going to have plenty of time to talk about that and lead up to the draft, because they're very, very, very different quarterbacks. We'll probably dedicate an episode just to that question, to be honest, and probably throw Love in there too, because we know Burrow's going to be the first one, but it's the other three that are really the intriguing conversation. But I will say, now that I mentioned Love, there was a team taken, I guess you can consider, out of consideration for those quarterbacks this week. And Indianapolis was one of the teams that was pegged for Love. They were pegged for potential trade up for Herbert. If Tua slipped because of medical for whatever reason, they were pegged for a potential trade up destination for him. And now they trade that pick, the 13th overall pick that everybody was expecting to be a long-term answer at quarterback, and instead they get DeForest Buckner and then pay him $21 million a year, which, for the record, I am totally fine with. Buckner's amazing. Yep. Totally fine with that deal. Totally fine.
We finally get to talk about somebody that we both really like and are totally on board with.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Buckner, he's one of the highest grades for a 5-tech I've ever given coming out of Oregon. He was an absolute monster, and he continued to be a monster in San Francisco. $21 million is 100% worth it. And the compensation that the Niners got for him was 100% worth it, especially when they paid Armstead. They couldn't afford both of them. They had to choose. They took the cheaper deal with Armstead and then shipped out Buckner. I understand all sides of the deal. What I'm curious about from the Colts' perspective is they pretty much just resigned themselves to the fact they're not getting a quarterback in the first round. Does that mean that we're getting Phillip Rivers in Indy?
I would be stunned if we didn't. Rivers to Indy was the one place I think that he really has a shot to be effective at this stage of his career for multiple reasons. One, he's playing inside. Two, he's got a coach who's a former quarterback who understands quarterbacks, who loves his work. He's got a good offensive line in front of him, which is huge for Rivers at this point in his career. It's the one place where all the sort of arrows align, and I think Phillip Rivers could have an impact this season. Beyond this season, I don't know. We'll see. But I would be really stunned if they don't make a play for Phillip Rivers. If they don't, the other option is the quarterback that a lot of people had them sinking their teeth into was either Herbert or Love, but I saw Love more. And as you know, I do a lot of mock drafts. I do pretty much like a mock draft a day just to see how the boards fall, use different boards, use different simulators, just kind of get a feel for where players go, where the plateaus are, where the talent drops, what kind of runs occur, all that stuff. And recently, I will say, since the combine, since the boards have been updated since the combine, I see Love in the second round a lot more often than I used to. And if he makes it even to the very top of the second round, I could see Indianapolis packaging some picks and going to get him.
I mean, that would be kind of the perfect scenario. I don't think it's going to happen, but it would be kind of the perfect scenario because then they get a stud defensive tackle, which they need, or somebody who can really play anything from the 1 to the 5 in Buckner. He's basically just young Calais Campbell to me.
Let's just say stud defensive lineman because he can do it all.
Yeah, so they get him, and then if Love falls, which again I don't think will happen, but theoretically it could, or maybe they really like Jalen Hurts, whatever. If you get a quarterback in the second round, and let's say you have Rivers, because clearly Brady's not going to go to Indy. That's not a realistic option. I don't know if Dalton wants to go to Indy because he knows that he would be replaced after a year. I think he wants something with maybe a little bit more long-term potential. Cough, cough, Chicago. Teddy, same thing. I think everybody knows that Indy's like a 1-year stop. So if they get a quarterback in the second round that they really like, and they get Buckner, that's a hell of a job by them. And again, the other side of the trade, I think, is fair compensation too. This is a very evenly balanced trade where both the Niners and the Colts could come out huge winners.
Yeah, we haven't talked about that, but that's fascinating. What if they got Teddy?
I mean, he fits what they do.
Yeah, he fits. And if they said, hey, you're just going to be our guy, you're going to take over for Brissett, and Brissett's going to back you up till he goes, and then we'll get you another backup. You're going to be the guy. You get to play behind, again, all the things we said about Rivers, right? Behind a strong offensive line, in a dome, with some good playmakers. With
they run
Marlon
the ball.
Mack. Yeah, boy, if they said, we're going to give you, whatever he's looking for. We just haven't talked about him there as a landing spot. And how's their money? I haven't checked their cap space.
Let me look right now, but I will say I would much rather have Teddy than Phillip Rivers.
Oh, 100% at this point. If you're looking for the future and not just a seriously set up 1-year run, almost like a Peyton Manning type run in Denver where you're just, this is it, one and done.
They have $45 million.
They could do it. He wants he's going to get, I think he's going to end up with 22, maybe 25. But I really think if you offered him 3 years, 22 million, maybe the first year guaranteed, couple of incentives if he plays really well, as Teddy, why would you not go there? You're going to get good protection. You got decent weapons. You got a coach, a head coach who's a former quarterback. I hadn't put those two together. I really hadn't seen Bridgewater as a Colt, but man, if they decide that they're out of drafting one and they want to go get one, they could be players for him. That would be really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it would fill their two biggest needs on day one of free agency. And then they can go into the draft with that second round pick and really be not tethered to anything. They could just take BPA. God forbid Denzel Mims falls to Indy, because that's the last thing I need as a Texans fan is to lose DeAndre Hopkins and Denzel Mims in the same offseason. But I kind of feel like that's going to happen.
It could. Well, just on that note, how's that Mitchell treating you?
I'm not well enough to cope with all this. Not gonna lie. I think I might need some of the barrel proof stuff. I made a mistake in not breaking out the barrel proof or the cask strength.
That's all right. There's always the after show for that. So
it's gonna be a long night. Speaking of defensive linemen getting money, we're still trying to figure out exactly what this means for the rest of the roster. Where does Brockers fit in with Baltimore with Calais Campbell and Brandon Williams? And I think Pierce is still there too, if I recall correct. I mean, they have 1 million defensive linemen now that can play interior, pretty again like Buckner, anything from 1 to 5. I don't know where they all fit together.
Beautifully, as is always the case with the Ravens and their front seven typically. But look, they know they're going to lose Matthew Judon. They're not going to pay him, the huge money that he's going to earn after his breakout year, and should go get, all credit to Matthew Judon.
I mean, he got tagged, so he's going to be there for a year, but that's it.
Maybe not. If somebody really wants an edge, it's a tag and trade. It's just like Yannick, right?
Yeah. I mean,
so but they know they need some pressure. And again, I had just tweeted out about the Ravens today, because the other thing the Ravens did today was trade Hayden Hurst and get a second back for it.
That was thievery.
Right. So
Absolute
I'm like,
thievery.
And I tweet out maybe 5 minutes before the Brocker deal happens, one of these days I'm going to figure out how the Ravens do it. And I put like hashtag black magic, because they always do this, right? They always turn it just the right way. They always draft the guy in the 4th or 5th round that's sitting there and you're like, of course the Ravens got him. In fact, this is one of the first things we talked about when we met each other at the Senior Bowl was these guys. We were talking about Carl Davis at the time, but these guys that are at the bottom, they're in the 3rd, they're in the 4th, and the Ravens come along and they're like, yep, I'll take that. And you're like, of course the Ravens got him when he was sitting there. And the same thing with Calais Campbell, right? They put out a 5th for Calais Campbell. They turn around and trade their 3rd string tight end for a 2nd rounder. And then they sign Brockers like within 2 days. And you're like, okay, now you have Calais Campbell and Michael Brockers on the same defensive line. If your defensive line was complete garbage, it's now great.
And that's
and the
with
Ravens
Brandon
line,
Williams, too.
Yeah, and the line wasn't complete garbage to start with. They had Brandon Williams, who is a highly capable and underrated player. Now you've got, for the most part, you got Williams and Brockers and Calais Campbell. Like, I don't really care who's coming off the edge. It would be nice to have a high value edge threat like Judon. And if they tag him and keep him, that's amazing. That's a crazy lineup for other offenses to deal with. But you just look at what the Ravens do year after year, time after time, cycle after cycle. They're also one of the all-time leaders in the last 10 years in compensatory picks. So they've got that formula dialed too. Like, they just have it dialed in terms of who they get, who they let go, how long they keep them, what they pay for them, how they move them, what they trade for them. It's just staggering and quite frankly, awe-inspiring to watch. It's
not to mention they have a coaching staff that gets the best out of these guys.
Always.
Michael Pierce, who actually is a free agent, which kind of explains a little bit, because they just needed bodies.
Sure.
And if you're going to get bodies, you might as well get good ones.
I'm like, they just needed bodies, so they went gotten Michael Brockers.
for good money, too. Like a good contract, a healthy contract.
Like,
but, if you're going to replace Pierce, you might as well get somebody who's better. But, Wormley's still there as a rotational guy because you assume that Campbell's going to be starting over Wormley. Dalen Mack, they just drafted out of A&M last year, who's a really, in my opinion, I loved him at Texas A&M. I think he's going to end up being a really good player. Ferguson, I thought was a good 2nd round value. They got him in the 3rd last year.
Yep. That's the thing. They always do that. Yeah. They will always come along and, you almost want to call it bottom feeding, but it's not. It's just opportunistic. It's the right time at the right level for excellent, excellent value. And it doesn't matter whether it's free agency or the draft or trades. They always seem to be able to pull the lever at the right time and get what other teams can't get. If your team, say Hayden Hurst was the 3rd string tight end on the Texans, there's no way they're pulling a 2nd. It's not happening. They're getting a 4th, but the Ravens dance in, drop him for a 2nd. They've got 2 good starting tight ends. It's just, they always have what they need. I would love to say it's maddening, but I just think it's fascinating and kind of really a prototypical model for how to operate in today's NFL.
Yeah, and you just know they're going to go into the draft. They're going to get Khalid Kareem in like the 4th round.
Stop it!
He's going to turn into a Pro Bowler. It's going to happen. Just
that's an ugly
it.
Swing, Brett. That's an ugly swing.
It's a Ravens thing to happen.
No, Khalid Kareem is going to end up, let's be frank, as a Raven or Patriot. Because those are the 2 places. Patriots, I would be most angry about because he would excel in their system. And quite frankly, that means I guess you could say Detroit. I don't think he'll end up there, but, Detroit is Patriots light, as is the Dolphins now. And Detroit's in the Bears division. So if Khalid Kareem ends up in Detroit's system and goes on a rampage, I'll be probably the most angry. The Ravens, I'd just be like, oh, yeah, nope, totally a typical Ravens move. I'd just move on. I just expect it now.
He came out the womb a Raven. That's just how it is.
Kind of. Yep.
Keeping in the AFC North, because it's another spending spree. There was a few teams that went on them. The Cleveland trio of Hooper, Conklin, and Keenum. I'll just start with Conklin. $14 million a year. Hell of a value for a really good right tackle.
Yeah, I'm not sure what kind of magic dust they sprinkled on that. Conklin is worth well more than that. We'll talk about a guy we don't like very much, or a deal we don't like that happened today, who got slightly less than that, but is much less of a player than Conklin. I think it's interesting between Hooper, Conklin, and Keenum. Like Hooper, I think is an overpay. Conklin, I think, is an underpay that we just talked about. And Keenum, I would say, is about right for average backup money and a guy that can come in and win you some games. So I think it all pencils. I think it comes out as sort of a good, flat, solid day where they overpaid for a tight end, which, okay, fine. He is the top tight end, but tight end free agent deals lately have been a minefield.
I don't think it's an overpay for Hooper because Kittle's going to get $16-17 million a year.
I don't think it's an overpay relative to the fact that he was a top tight end in free agency. And look, you overpay in free agency. That's what you do because you didn't draft for that spot. So you have to overpay a little bit. But if anything, I think they paid a little more for Hooper than I think his value is. I think they paid less for Conklin than his value is. And I think they paid about right down the middle on what Keenum's value is. So again, it's a good day for them. They fill 3 of their spots, and it's money wise. I think it all sort of comes out in the wash.
I think you're right in that it all kind of evens out. For the Hooper overpay, I would say relative to what the tight end market was 24 hours ago, yeah, it's a little excessive. Relative to the tight end market after Kittle and Mark Andrews signed their deals, man, he's going to be straight up cheap compared to them.
Yeah, and that's always the way it is whatever's big quarterback deal this year or 2 years ago that everybody thought was massive and crazy is pretty good value now. That's nutty, and that's just, especially with the salary cap. Although the salary cap, we'll probably talk about that later with the new CBA. We haven't even really mentioned that there's labor peace for the next 10 years, that a new CBA got signed, but the salary cap went up significantly less than almost any projection I had seen, which is probably a little bit better for negotiators because there's not a 35% jump in the salary cap, which some people had predicted. So it's a little bit easier for them to sort of pencil year over year and apple to apple increase. But yeah, so those are the big ones off the first day of free agency. Phew, that's a lot. That's enough. But to carry on with that, we're going to pick out one we like that maybe wasn't a headline signing that we either like the fit of or we like the value of, where they landed. Maybe it's a coach relationship. And then we're going to pick out one I said one we hate, but I think it's kind of one we more mildly dislike because it's tough to hate anything today because you don't know how it's really going to work come the season. But who's the one you like maybe a little bit more or just paid a little bit more attention to than the average fan might?
I mean, Christian Kirksey for $6.5 million a year. I mean, he's already a better player than Blake Martinez, but you're getting him for $6.5 million. I mean, that's a steal.
That's less than Kwiatkowski signed for going to the Raiders.
Yeah,
and Kwiatkowski's a good player who signed for less than Danny Trevathan got, which is odd because everybody said the whole reason that Quit might leave is that he was going to get more than Trevathan. Turns out Trevathan's going to make more per year by a little bit than Kwiatkowski, but I'm with you. Kirksey, that's a solid move for what was a very good defense last year. Green Bay has now decided to use free agency. They famously for years swore it off, especially the first wave of free agency. They've modernized their approach there, paid big dividends for them on the defensive side of the ball last year. And now they had Kirksey for what looks like a real value signing. Kirksey might not be a name that a lot of casual NFL fans are committed, but boy, yeah, Blake Martinez, I would love as a Bears fan for Blake Martinez to stay in the middle of the Packers defense for as long as possible. But Kirksey definitely
keep in mind, like the thing with Martinez is his instincts were just terrible.
You don't have to tell me twice. Again, as a Bears fan, I love him there. Just keep him
But
there as long as you can.
Kirksey, is he super fast and twitchy, and does he have exceptional range like a lot of these modern day great linebackers? The Deion Joneses, the Isaiah Simmons that's coming in this year. Can he move like them? Hell no. That's why he only got $6.5 million. But the dude's in the right spot a lot, and I think that's very valuable for a Green Bay defense that really a lot of their problems last year in run defense were just fit related. It wasn't like their defensive line was doing their jobs. The linebackers were not getting into their fits, particularly Blake Martinez. Just get a guy with good instincts who could just be in the right spot, and the defensive line will take care of the rest. The DBs will take care of the rest. That's all you need, is just get a linebacker that won't screw it up. And Kirksey for $6.5 million is a tremendous deal because he won't screw it up. I love that fit for them.
Yeah, I'm going to stick with linebackers, and I'm going to go with a guy that some folks outside the NFC North may not have heard about. Stephen Weatherly, guy that came out of Vanderbilt a few years ago. I really liked him as a sort of developmental edge with upside, guy you could bring in as almost a third down specialist. Really aggressive, pretty quick, was stacked behind two other really quality edges in Minneapolis, and didn't get a chance to shine. And now gets a chance again. I think he signed for about the same. I think it's $6.5 million per
625.
Yeah, so slightly less, a couple 100,000 less, but is going to get more. I don't want to say starting reps, but definitely more rotational reps. Might be a starter in that defense, and super excited to see what he can do. I like his potential. I had him penciled in. We did a podcast that we released this morning on Bears Over Beers, and I predicted he'd stay with Minnesota because he liked the fit. He liked Zimmer. He liked what they were getting out of him, but clearly went out, tested the waters. Somebody said, hey, we're going to give you a bigger slice of the pie in terms of playing time. He went on the first day. I think he's a guy that's developmental, and you might see come out and get that 5, 6, 7 sacks next year for the Panthers, and that would be a good thing for the player, and obviously a good thing for the Panthers that you get 7 sacks out of a guy that's you're paying 6.25. We just talked about that ratio of sacks to millions, and that's exceeding your ratio. And I think Weatherly is a guy that could do it. So I really like that fit.
Plus, I think he has a little bit of versatility in terms of he could play with his hand in the dirt or standing up. And I think we know that Carolina kind of wants to – they don't want to just be a straight-up 4-3 anymore. They'll probably run some 4-down stuff, but they want guys that are flexible to be able to play as a stand-up rusher, maybe drop a little bit here and there if they want to go into some 5-2 looks, just kind of get a little bit more creative and not just run the straight 4-3 that they ran for a long time. I think
rotate. That's the thing about Weatherly is occasionally in college they would rotate him into the middle. They'd stand him up as a straight ILB, which was always staggering to me because he was 260 pounds or 265 or whatever. Typically played with his hand in the dirt as a rusher, and then you'd get to a nickel down and you'd see that guy in the middle, and it was like, whoa, wait, he has that capability?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So that's why he was on my list in the first place the year he came out. They didn't really play him like that, obviously, in Minnesota because, look, they've got some very good guys in the middle in Minnesota. But again, maybe we'll see some looks like that, like you said, like a 5-2 look, where you could either run him as the wide guy, the wide 9, or as one of the two. So that would be, it'll be fascinating to see how they use him. I like it for him. I didn't think it would happen, so I'm kind of excited that a player like that kind of gets released and maybe gets unlocked. I don't know. We'll see. But because of that, that's the one I like a little bit more.
Yeah. Also, remember, the Panthers are going to be a very blitz-heavy team next year, so using him as like just an ad rusher, like you said, when you line him up in the middle, because Phil Snow is going to be running that defense, who ran rules defense even going back to Temple, which I know you studied Yannick Ngakoue very intensely when he was coming out, so you know that defense very intimately and all the crazy rushes they would throw at people. They're going to be doing that in Carolina, so having a guy like Weatherly that you can put literally anywhere in the front, immensely valuable. So I love that fit. Yeah,
Ngakoue was a Terp, but no, if you stack Weatherly over Burns,
wait, he was at Maryland? I thought he was at Temple.
Yeah, no, Ngakoue was a Terp.
Who am I thinking of? Because I have vivid memories.
You're thinking of the guy that went to Arizona, Hassan.
Oh, yeah,
Reddick.
Yeah, because I remember Hackenberg getting sacked by a 2-man rush against Temple, and Reddick was the guy that did it.
Right. Yeah, no, and Reddick is a similar player, so I can see confusing the two and same geographic area for sure. But if you take Weatherly and stack him over the side that they have Brian Burns on, like,
oh, yeah.
Good luck. Like, you better have some athletes out there blocking those two, because one big guy is not going to do it, or a big guy and a sort of classic inline tight end probably not going to win against those two, depending. And then maybe you throw a twist in and you get Burns on the far outside and Weatherly pushing inside with power, because he's a pretty stout dude. You're going to have some fun combinations on that Panthers line. So I'm excited for what they're going to cook up. What Matt Rule and his staff are going to cook up. I think it's a good, again, big potential lever boom signing, the kind of thing that Tampa Bay got out of Shaq Barrett, right, where they signed him for basically no money as he came as a backup rusher, had been stuffed behind Von Miller and Chubb, and all of a sudden Barrett comes and drops 19 sacks. Now, is Weatherly going to drop 19 sacks? I don't think so. But again, if he drops 7 or 8, it's a great value at $6 million per.
Yeah, I mean, 7 or 8 sacks would be a great value at 11 per, so that's a hell of a deal. I would say, in terms of signings that maybe I'm not as keen on, again, not saying it's a bad signing, but just one that, when you look at the values of like Weatherly to Carolina or Kirksey to Green Bay, and then you look at what the Jets just paid for Fant at $10 million a year, and you're like, man, that's how you're spending your money? Is George Fant for $10 million a year when you're probably going to take a tackle anyway who's better than him, who would start over him? And like, if he's a swing tackle, okay. If you're running a lot of like jumbo, maybe, but I don't get it. Again, he has a role. That role is not a $10 million a year role to me, especially if Jack Conklin's getting 14 and he's getting 10.
No, it doesn't look good on paper. I saw this one, and again, I double checked the blue check mark on Twitter to make sure whoever was reporting it wasn't just pulling my leg, because again, as a resident of the Pacific Northwest, certainly familiar with what George Fant's done with the Seahawks. Again, valuable role player and a guy that's developed, a long shot guy, one of John Snyder's, grab him low, was a tight end, convert him, turn him into a tackle. Like, great story, but is that $30 million over 3 years?
Oh my God! Speaking of $30 million over 3 years, I'm gonna. Sorry for interrupting the show.
No,
but
go ahead.
I found your signing that you're gonna hate. Blake Martinez just got $30 million over 3 years from the New York Giants.
Yes! Yes! I don't hate that at all, because that is the double whammy.
Oh my God.
Blake Martinez, who is a very average linebacker, eating up Dave Gettleman's chest of whatever.
$10 million.
I love that in so many ways.
What is Dave doing?
Well, the same thing Dave always does. Now, we haven't had this podcast long enough for listeners to be familiar with the fact that I don't go after people in the NFL very hard, because I don't think it's great business. And typically, you don't know, right? You want to see it play out. Like, George Fant could play at a starter's level, and we could both look like idiots. I went after Nick Kwiatkowski hard at the beginning of last season, saying he gets exposed in pass coverage. Nick upped his game. He played very well in relief when Roquan was out. And when Danny was out, and I went on the pod midseason and said, hey, mea culpa, I'm really sorry, Nick. You proved me wrong. Good on you. And he went and got his bag in Las Vegas, right? But one of the guys I will go after consistently in the NFL, because he is terrible, is Dave Gettleman. And Dave Gettleman has shown what I consider to be true negligence multiple times. And this is just another example. Did you see the other thing they did today? We haven't even talked about it.
Oh God, which thing? Oh, Bradbury for 15?
No, Bradbury for 15 I actually thought was pretty good for a Gettleman move.
I didn't like that move at all.
I know you don't like that one, but I think Bradbury's the second tier starting corner in this behind Byron Jones, and that's what you're going to have to pay to get him, and you need a corner. I actually think Bradbury's a fine move. No, they tagged somebody today.
Who did they tag?
Go ahead, look it up. I just
God,
want to hear this reaction live on air. Go ahead.
Jesus Christ, Dave, what'd you do now?
Yeah, I just can't wait. I want video. I really do. I just want the live shot of your face when you see this.
Oh, no.
Yes, they did.
How much is that tag for?
It's a defensive lineman. It's a lot.
It's 16.1.
Yeah. Defensive linemen are not cheap. So go ahead. Tell the listeners, who did Dave Gettleman tag today?
Leonard Williams.
That's right.
For $16
and then he went
million.
and paid Blake Martinez 10.
They don't have any money.
Dave is Dave, and Dave
they have no money.
I really feel for all my Giants friends, Giants fan friends. Gettleman is completely driving that franchise nose first into the dirt. He is massacring what has been a very proud legacy, a Super Bowl winning franchise. You got Parcells, Eli winning 2, all that stuff, even in fairly recent history. Dave Gettleman is driving the wheels off that thing. He is grinding the gears into dust and ramming that thing into a pole like over and over and over again. And 5 years from now, people will be like, why did we let him do it? And he just keeps doing it. And then he is completely unrepentant, comes out at press conferences and says, all of you out in the audience, you have no idea what I'm doing. You suck. I know what I'm doing. Don't question me. And everybody looks at his moves and goes, but Dave, like, nobody else is doing that. That seems really stupid. And he is completely obstreperous about that. Like, Gettleman is the new Ryan Grigson. He is terrible.
Leonard Williams got half a sack in 12 starts last season.
Leonard Williams, who was a draft favorite of mine when he went to the Jets.
I loved him at USC.
I loved him at USC. The Bears missed out on him by 1 spot the year after they missed out on Aaron Donald by 1 spot, and I was crushed both years. That one hasn't. Aaron Donald obviously has proven that I was correct about that. Leonard Williams has not necessarily proven me correct, let's be honest. But to go and franchise that guy after you basically rented him for half a season for what you traded for him, and now to double down and franchise that guy, nobody's going to trade for him. He's not a tag and trade candidate. And then to drop $10 freaking million on Blake Martinez, who is a very limited player when, you've got a, so anyways, George Fant is the one you don't like. The one I don't like, and this plays very well into the conversation we're currently having, and this is going to hurt even worse with the Blake Martinez news. Corey Littleton is sitting out there. He's a free agent, right?
And
Corey
a
Littleton
great free agent.
And a great free agent. Like, I think the top inside linebacker candidate available is Corey Littleton, right? He's a do-it-all linebacker. He's fast enough for the NFL. He's big. He loves contact. He's smart. His run fits are good. He's been a bit overshadowed in the LA defense, so he might come at a slightly lower premium. I bet he ain't going to make $10 million a year. And how would Corey Littleton look in the middle of the Giants defense and replacing a guy like Alec Ogletree, who they let go? Littleton is basically a better version of Ogletree. He's the reason that Ogletree basically left or was available for trade out of the Rams, is that Littleton was playing better than him. And that guy's available on day one of free agency. And he's got, I'm sure his agent's getting calls and whatever else, but that guy's a splash first day signing for me. Although he doesn't have name recognition, he is definitely a first day free agent type player. And I guarantee, well, I don't guarantee after this, but I would imagine he signs for at least a little less than $10 million a year. Quitt got $7. Look at some of the other linebackers. Danny signed for $8. I think Littleton comes for 9.5, maybe 10, but I would be okay with paying Littleton 10. Playing Blake Martinez 10 is just pure negligence. So Littleton is my move I don't like so much, is that nobody signed him on the first day when I think he's clearly one of the best inside linebackers available in this year's free agency.
100% agreed on Littleton. 2 more deals were signed while we were talking.
Not surprising.
These were about an hour ago, but I want to get your thoughts on them. Kendall Fuller is going back to the Redskins.
Oh, that's a weird fit.
4 years, 10 a year. So 4 years, 40.
I mean, we talked about him on Bears Over Beers on the pod that released this morning, just because of his relationship to Kyle, and wouldn't it be cool if he ended up in Chicago? But I said, look, he's a very good nickel. He's a top 3rd nickel in the league. That's a desired position. It's a starter because nickel is the new base. He was going to be too rich for the Bears anyways, so it was just kind of a nice to have sort of a thing. But I'd say 10 a year seems pretty reasonable for where he's at. He's a younger guy. He's got some good experience. He's been in 2 good systems now. Well, 1 good system. Now he goes back to the Redskins. I'm cool with that. It just seems an odd fit to me that he would return to the franchise. Maybe he really believes in Rivera.
I think it is the Rivera factor.
It has to be.
He's very
there's
popular.
Nothing else that's attractive about that.
No, and I think Dan Snyder liked him too.
Well, yeah, but is that that's like having a creepy teacher who really thinks you're cool.
Hey, you know how Dan Snyder treats his favorites. And
I do, but I would say it has to be the Rivera thing. But I'm okay with that from a money standpoint.
Yeah, it's a good deal money wise.
It's a plus for their secondary. I'm pretty cool with that. What's the other one?
I'm gonna file this one under whatever. Randall Cobb, 3 years, 27.9 per to Houston.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Isn't that what they use Will Fuller for? But all right.
I mean, Will Fuller for 6 games a year.
Well, sure, and Randall Cobb for the other 6, and then what are you going to do?
I mean, it's Kenny Stills and Randall Cobb.
I know, but no, I'm just glad that Cobb didn't end up as the quote-unquote speed threat to Chicago. I'd heard some kind of far-fetched whispers about that, and I was dreading it, so I'm sorry.
I don't mind him in the slot.
Yeah, I think it's one of those guys that his race is largely run. He's going to be good for a year or 2 as a supporting cast member, so I think he can do that. But yeah, I think you're right. Kind of file it under whatever. It's not like it's huge money, and he can be productive. He's obviously a very good player in his time in Green Bay. What's left is the question, and for that compensation, if you get something out of him, sure, seems reasonable.
In the grand scheme of things, 9 isn't a huge number per year, so it's not a backbreaker.
No, I mean Amari just got 20. So
yeah, but is he a difference maker still at this point in his career? Probably not. Is he fine when Will Fuller inevitably gets hurt again? And Will Fuller is a difference maker, but again, he's not going to be on the field for every single game. Is Cobb fine to fill in? Probably, but he's not nearly going to be I'll put it this way: they still got to draft some dudes, at least 2 of them. Whether it's Mims, whether it's KJ Hamler, whatever, they still got to draft guys. Putting Randall Cobb on your roster does not mean that you don't need a draft receiver anymore. He's your wide receiver 4 is what he is. And he's a good one, but that's what he is.
And a mentor, he's a guy veteran. He's a pro. He understands the game. He understands coverage. He understands leverage. He's going to help those guys develop. I think you're right. It doesn't preempt them from drafting a wide receiver, and shouldn't in a loaded wide receiver draft class. But is he somebody you're going to stand up and say, this guy's in the way of our high round draft pick? No.
But it's fine. There's worse deals for wide receiver 4s. So
yep, I agree.
There's probably going to be more deals after we finish recording, but we've been going for I don't know, a long time now, damn near an hour and a half. So I think we'll wrap it up there. But I really appreciate everybody tuning in, listening to what is probably the first of a couple free agency shows we have, because this is only the first day. A lot more deals to come, especially as you mentioned, Corey Littleton. Before we get out of here, I want to ask, How's that glass treating you?
It's good. It's almost gone. I poured, probably a couple. Well, nope, sorry, it is gone. Poured probably a couple fingers over ice in a smaller glass. But again, I haven't had Glenlivet. Certainly don't remember having the 12 anytime soon. It's double oaked and a little bit smoother, a little less smoky than many of the scotches you mentioned. And me being more of a sort of whiskey and bourbon guy than a scotch guy, I think it went down quite nicely.
Yeah, this Michter's American's really good. It's got a little bit more barrel spice than I expected. Not like a rye kind of spice, but on the back end, on the back of your tongue, you definitely feel it, almost like and it's not even like a baking spice either. There's just kind of like that tingle that you get from I don't even know how to describe it. It almost kind of tastes a little bit like Angel's Envy. Where where you really feel it on the back of the tongue. It doesn't quite go down, like a Woodford double oaked where it's just like bourbon flavored water, where I could absolutely get destroyed on Woodford because it go down so easy. It's not like that, but I like it. It's got just enough bite to kind of give it some character, but it doesn't like blow your face off. So, Michter's American, I really like about approval.
Oh, good. The other thing I like about having this Glenlivet 12 here is when you eventually come by and we record podcasts here, I'll have something for you to drink.
Exactly. I mean, I love my scotches.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, again, thank you to everybody for listening. We're going to get out of here. It's like 9:45 at night. I'm dog tired. I got to get up at 4 a.m. to edit another film room. This one's coming on Joe Burrow some point later this week. No idea when that's going to be, but it's going to be at some point this week. EJ, I know, is going to be really hammering home his Bears free agency takes. Look for those on Windy City Gridiron, and of course the wonderful Bears Over Beers podcast. We'll be back soon with another episode of the Bootleg Football Podcast. Hope you join us for that one, and until then, later.